At dawn, the Red Sea was calm, too calm, but beneath its glassy surface, war was already on the move. Without warning, missiles screamed in from Yemen, timed with brutal precision. The USS Truman America's floating fortress had been marked. But this wasn't just a strike. It was an insult. They aimed for our weakness. They wanted headlines. What they got was hell. Within seconds, steel roared to life. Jets launched like thunder. Sea Whiz cannons lit the sky with fire. Not a single enemy warhead touched the Truman. And when the dust cleared, our response wasn't a statement. It was a reckoning. No press conference, no mercy. Just payloads delivered with the cold precision of a nation that's had enough. Because when you strike a sleeping giant, you'd better pray. It doesn't wake. But they woke it. And now, the sea remembers. This is not just defense. This is payback. Relentless. Silent American. Before we start, let us know where you're watching this video from, and if you enjoy it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. The morning sun crept over the Red Sea like a slow breath, casting a golden sheen across waters. So still, they mirrored the sky. On the flight deck of the USS Harry S. Truman, steam hissed quietly from the catapults. Jets sat idling in silence, and sailors moved with the rhythm of routine check signals and calm voices over the comms. It was another patrol, another day in the long shadow of the Middle East. But deep inside the Combat Information Center, Commander Jack Rains leaned over the console, eyes narrowed, senses sharp. He'd spent 28 years in the Navy through firefights, false alarms, and too many close calls. And something about this morning didn't sit right. The air felt heavy, the quiet too complete. Rains had learned long ago the deadliest moments often wear the softest disguises. Calm seas, that's when the devil shows his hand. Somewhere out there, just beyond the radar's reach, something was coming. He couldn't explain it, not yet, but the tension in his gut wasn't imagination. It was instinct, the kind men like him were paid to trust, and above them in that perfect blue sky, something was watching, or worse, waiting. At exactly 0724 hours, the silence aboard the USS Harry S. Truman shattered like glass. First, it was the sharp electronic chirp, short, piercing. Then came the low, rising wail of general quarters echoing through every corridor, every bulkhead, every sailor's spine. The radar screens in the Combat Information Center flared to life with a flurry of red, fast-moving contacts, low-altitude multiple vectors. Yemen. The blips weren't drifting aimlessly. They were screaming toward them. Not one, not two, 18. Commander Jack Rains stood frozen for half a breath, his coffee halfway to his lips. Then he dropped the mug and sprinted toward CIC boots, hammering against steel. There was no need to shout. The crew had already moved. Stations were manned. Panels lit up. Aegis consoles began auto-tracking officers, barked coordinates. Techs fed targeting data to intercept systems. The ship's pulse had changed from calm to combat in seconds. This ain't a drill. Rains said, his voice calm but iron-laced, and no one doubted it. Not this time. What hit hardest wasn't just the scale of the incoming barrage. It was the timing. The enemy had waited. Waited for the Truman's air wing rotation when jets were on deck for maintenance and pilots off shift. They'd chosen the hour carefully, coldly calculating when the carrier group would be at its softest. And they pulled the trigger. It wasn't just an attack. It was an insult. A surgical strike aimed not just at metal and fuel, but at the pride and precision of the U.S. Navy itself. Rains clenched his jaw. These weren't random rockets lobbed out of desperation. This was coordinated, intentional. And in his eyes, dishonorable. No warning, no confrontation, just a silent barrage from the shadows designed to cripple, to humiliate. It wasn't warfare. It was treachery cloaked in missile smoke. He looked at the screen. 18 threats closing fast. Cruise missiles, ballistic rockets, possibly drones. A saturation strike. A dirty tactic meant to overwhelm. They were betting on numbers. On confusion. On one missile slipping through and making history. Rains stepped forward and spoke into the comm weapons free. All layers are hot. Let's remind them who we are, because if this enemy thought they'd caught Truman sleeping, they were dead wrong. This crew had rehearsed for war in the dead of night under pressure in full gear, and now it was no longer theory. If you're watching this while on the go, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. It was real, and somewhere deep in Commander Rains's chest, the sting of betrayal had already turned into something colder, something older. Resolve inside the Combat Information Center. The digital map pulsed with threat vectors, missile trajectories painted in crimson projected impact zones, flickering like storm clouds over blue sea. Intelligence feeds rolled in overlays stacking one atop another. Launch points traced to the Yemeni coastline flight times, calculated to the second altitudes verified. This wasn't chaos. This was orchestration. The kind only born from intent. Commander Jack Rains studied the operational timeline with a clenched jaw. He'd seen war born out of desperation. But this was different. This was cold. Precise. Strategic. The enemy had waited for a window of vulnerability, an exact moment, when the Truman's air wing was in mid-rotation, when pilots were off rotation, and maintenance crews were elbow-deep in aircraft diagnostics. They didn't just attack America's most powerful warship. They did it knowing full well when her sword arm was momentarily lowered. They picked our weakest moment. Rains muttered more to himself than anyone else. And they thought we wouldn't notice. But he noticed, and every man and woman on that ship now knew what had happened. This wasn't a strike against equipment. It was a direct insult to the honor of the fleet. The message was clear. We know when you're exposed, and we're not afraid to take the shot. What they didn't count on was the spirit inside that steel Rains's chest burned with something deeper than anger. It wasn't vengeance yet. It was protective fury, a primal, unshakable force forged from decades of service from every young sailor he'd ever sworn to bring home from every flag-draped coffin he'd saluted. These missiles weren't just coming for hulls and hardware, they were gunning for his people. He stood over the console and pointed toward the growing spiderweb of incoming projectiles. We're not going to let a single one through, he said, voice low and dangerous. They came to kill Americans today. They're going to leave with nothing but regret. Outside sailors raced across the deck. Jets were fueled, munitions locked in. Inside firing solutions were refined intercept zones drawn, fallback layers set. The Truman was hurt, but not helpless. Because even a wounded giant doesn't lie still. It rises and it bites. The Combat Information Center pulsed with electricity screens alive with data systems in full synchronization. Commander Jack Rains stood at the heart of it all, eyes fixed on the digital battlefield unfolding in real time. The Aegis radar spun like a sentinel possessed, locking onto each incoming threat with unwavering precision. Red trails bloomed across the screen, enemy projectiles moving fast and low, but so did blue interceptors rising to meet them. The first salvo of SM-2 missiles launched with a bone-deep thud, punching skyward like thunderbolts. Seconds later, evolved Sea Sparrows streaked off their rails, carving brilliant white arcs through the sky. Every screen lit up with impact flashes. Rains watched 1, then 2, then 6. Enemy blips vanish in midair, gone in bright eruptions 30,000 feet above the sea. Closer threats came in lower, skimming the surface like sharks hunting below the radar line. But the Sea Rams weren't fooled. They shrieked to life, locked in, and responded with blistering precision buzzsaws of steel and speed. The ship's last line of defense stood tall. Above deck, the roar was deafening. FA-18, Super Hornets shot from the catapults like hell-bent phantoms, afterburners blazing claws out and radar hot. Each bird carried a full combat load, AEM-120s, Sidewinders drop tanks. No warnings, no games, just air superiority in motion. Then came the moment Rains would remember most. A drone slipped past the first defensive net, riding low and silent like a ghost. It came within 1,000 yards of the Truman, and for a heartbeat, just one, it looked like something might break through. But the Sea Whiz spun into motion, its Vulcan cannon barking to life. 75 rounds per second ripped through the air. 3 seconds, 1,000 rounds. And what was once a threat became nothing more than smoke and fragments sinking into salt water. "Target neutralized," came the voice over comms. All of them. Rains exhaled for the first time in minutes. Around him, no cheers, just the crisp rhythm of confirmation, reloading, recalibration. This was what readiness looked like. Not chaos, not panic. Just a machine man and metal doing exactly what it was built to do. He felt something stir in his chest. Not relief, not pride alone, but a kind of reverence. Admiration for a crew that had rehearsed this dance 1,000 times and executed it without hesitation. For a doctrine that hadn't failed them. For a ship that didn't blink under fire. This wasn't luck. It was preparation. And it had just saved every soul on board. Commander Jack Rains stood at the center of the war room. The glow of tactical displays reflecting off his face like battlefield firelight. There was no need to ask permission. Not today. Deep inside Truman's combat protocols was a clause etched in cold steel echo package, a standing doctrine that authorized immediate retaliation under specific threat conditions. Those conditions had just been met, in full. If you're watching this while on the go, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. He didn't flinch. He didn't stall. He simply leaned in, eyes sharp as a hawk, and spoke 4 words that changed everything. "Let's burn their map." The order rippled outward like a shockwave. Within minutes, the flight deck transformed into a storm of kinetic energy. Steam hissed from the catapults. Ordnance crews loaded precision-guided munitions beneath the wings of 12 Super Hornets. Nearby, 2 EA-18G Growlers rolled into position, electronic warfare pods humming softly, ready to blind anything that dared look skyward. Then came the roar. One by one, the Hornets launched twin afterburners, igniting the morning with blades of fire. Their mission was clear and unflinching. Eliminate the exact launch sites that had threatened the Truman, a suspected drone assembly facility, a mobile SAM battery hidden near Al-Hudaydah, a fortified command bunker carved deep into the hills outside Ras Isa. Almost simultaneously, 40 miles away, vertical launch cells snapped open aboard the USS Gravely. With a growl like thunder cracking from the earth itself, a volley of Tomahawk missiles screamed toward the horizon. They flew silently low, unyielding, carrying not warnings but justice. The results came fast. Direct hits, 0 civilian casualties, secondary explosions confirmed ammunition fuel and comms gear igniting in synchronized eruptions. The bunker didn't just collapse, it imploded. Buried secrets buried deeper still. No tweet followed, no press conference, no camera flash, only smoke curling into the sky. And a silence more powerful than any speech. Rains stood quietly, headset still in place, listening as confirmations rolled in. He said nothing, but behind his eyes burned a satisfaction, not born from anger, but from order restored. Not vengeance for the sake of pride, but righteous justice delivered without spectacle. This was how the United States responded, not with noise, not with theater, but with force, precision and finality. And somewhere on the Yemeni coast, those who had once whispered about American weakness had just learned otherwise. In Washington, the official response was silence. No podium, no flag-draped statements, just a short line buried in a press briefing. "We are monitoring the situation." But aboard the USS Truman, the new rules of engagement came through crisp and clear. No room for misinterpretation. If it locks on radar, it gets burned. Period. Those words weren't dramatic. They were Doctrine A shift. A line in the sand drawn not in ink, but in steel and fire. The age of absorbing the first blow was over. The gloves were off, and every officer on that ship knew it. Up above, E-2D Hawkeyes circled like silent sentinels, scanning the skies with radar scopes that never slept. Their broad wings caught the morning sun turning slowly and steadily. Watchful eyes for a fleet that no longer waited to be struck before answering. The doctrine had changed from defense to deterrence, from caution to consequence. Commander Rains stood at the bridge, arms folded as the brief scrolled across his handheld. His jaw tightened, but not in anger. No, this was something deeper, something steadier. The kind of clarity that only comes when a nation remembers exactly what it stands for. This isn't about retaliation anymore, he said quietly to the officer beside him. This is posture, precision, presence. He looked across the sea where the horizon met the glow of radar scans. Somewhere out there, another radar might twitch to life. Another operator might test American resolve. But now, even the flicker of hostile intent would meet swift and silent judgment. This wasn't an escalation. It was recalibration. And for Rains and for every sailor and aviator in that strike group, it wasn't just about protecting their ship. It was about protecting the idea of order in a world that seemed increasingly willing to gamble with chaos. The message was as old as the flag on the mast. Freedom doesn't wait for its turn. It watches. It warns. And when pushed, it acts. There was no swagger on the Truman, no bravado. Just a fleet that now moved with eyes wide open, hands steady, and a renewed sense of duty. Not just to defend American lives, but to uphold the very balance that keeps seas safe, allies confident, and tyrants guessing. Because when the storm comes again, and it always does, it won't find the US Navy sleeping. It'll find it ready. And this time watching first. Twilight fell over the Red Sea like a curtain drawn, slowly casting the deck of the USS Truman in hues of faded gold and deep steel blue. The storm had passed, but its presence lingered in the scent of scorched jet fuel, in the faint clink of shell casings swept from steel, in the silent discipline of a crew that had stared into the barrel of war and didn't blink. If you're watching this while on the go, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. Sailors moved across the deck with quiet precision, hosing down residue-securing gear, checking and rechecking aircraft that had launched and landed in the heat of combat. The jets now sat parked, still armed but resting like predators in wait, not asleep, but simply still. Nothing about the ship shouted victory. There were no banners, no boasts. Just the sound of the sea licking at the hull and the low hum of systems running under the surface. Commander Jack Rains stood alone near the bow, his cap low, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The sea looked the same as it had that morning, calm, endless, quiet. But it wasn't the same. Neither was he. The Truman hadn't taken a scratch, but it had sent a message written in flame, in silence, in precision. The enemy wouldn't show the damage on their screens. They wouldn't parade the smoking craters or the shattered drones. But the scars were there, etched into command bunkers, wiped off drone launch pads, burned into their tactical pride. Rains let the wind pass over his shoulders, his thoughts still with the men and women who had answered the call without hesitation. No grand speeches, no dramatics, just readiness, execution, control. That was the deterrence. Not noise, but stillness backed by power. The kind of quiet that makes enemies hesitate before blinking. He spoke barely above a whisper. Let him try again. Not as a challenge, as a warning. Because the sea had changed. It was no longer calm. It was aware, watched over by radars that never blinked, and steel that never sleeps. And every mile of it, from the Horn of Africa to the Gulf of Aden, now knew the truth. The Truman wasn't just floating, she was waiting. And the next time she wouldn't wait long. So now we're left with the question that doesn't get asked in press briefings or polished headlines. It gets asked in the hearts of those who've worn the uniform and those who still believe in drawing lines that matter. Was the response enough? Or was it merely the beginning? The Houthis gambled with American lives and lost, but their silence afterward wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And while the Truman strike sent shockwaves, some threats don't fold with fire alone. Some dig in deeper, waiting for the next blind spot, the next soft hour, the next political hesitation. Because next time it may not be missiles over water. It could be a drone over a base, a warhead aimed at a partner nation, or worse, a civilian target. The enemy is learning, adapting. So should we. So what do we do now? Sit back and monitor or dismantle the threat at its root before it mutates into something far more dangerous. We'll leave that for you to weigh in on. Drop your thoughts below because dialogue matters as much as doctrine. And if you believe in silent strength, in swift justice, in the kind of vigilance that doesn't need applause, subscribe and stand with us. Because out here, justice doesn't drift, it hunts. What we take away from this story isn't just a lesson in firepower, it's a lesson in preparation in principle and the quiet force of deterrence. The USS Truman didn't prevail because it was lucky. It prevailed because it was ready to absorb a blow, ready to strike back, ready to defend not just a ship but the values it sails for. We're reminded that freedom isn't protected by speeches, it's shielded by those who train in silence, who stand their post, whether the cameras are rolling or not. And when the storm comes, as it always does, it's not the flashiest force that holds the line. It's the one that never left it. In a world growing more volatile by the hour, vigilance isn't an option. It's a duty. We owe that to the men and women who stand watch in our name, and to every generation that hopes to inherit peace. So if this story moved, you share it. Speak up. Subscribe. Because awareness is armor, and truth delivered without fear is a weapon that never dulls. Stay sharp, stay ready, and never forget who we are.